History. We, for the most part, tend to agree on certain key events, dates, prominent figures. For everything else, well...
The topics of the day are history and historiography. Leading up to this, a reminder on our lessons covering power. We can and should talk about power. It's an important aspect of equity. We cover the theory of power to understand our current situation, and on top of that can witness the practical applications by who is getting what, who's reaching their goals, their interests. Power and history walk hand in hand. Just as we hold influence over power in our community, history is very much the same. History is familiar to most of us. It's the study of the past. What about historiography, a much less discussed subject? Historiography is the study of histories. It's a review of how histories were created. How were they written? What references were used? Even what assumptions were made when characterizing historical events. After all, two history books covering the same place and time period can vary greatly. Like a movie that's been given a remake, it'll look different depending on the writer, the director, the actors, the cinematography, and the editing. When it comes to equity, we're well served considering how we explain the cause and effect in our histories. What events in the past affect our present day? What events of today will impact tomorrow? The point of contention often revolves around whether our problematic past decisions still impact us today, and to what degree, as well as what inequities affect the opportunities of our children tomorrow. In sum, history describes the past, explains the present, and affects decisions about the future. I ask each of us, what is the theme, the story of the United States? What is it for us, for our organization, the state we live in? Here's a quick one. When did U.S. history begin? With the English colonizers and the founding fathers? Or the indigenous peoples who came before? For me, I was taught about some of the tragedies in U.S. history. I heard that events like the Trail of Tears and the Sand Creek Massacre were bad things. I learned that slavery too was wrong, along with Jim Crow laws. The theme, I would say, though, is one of improvement and progress. The tale I heard was one where, despite our flaws, there was a core to America, sometimes because of the Constitution itself, other times because of a more ambiguous feeling of who we are as a nation, that America is inherently good, and we have triumphed again and again to be the great country we are today. There are other versions. There are those histories that see only the best, the most positive, that do not mention that many of our founding fathers owned and committed atrocities against slaves. Histories that ignore the statements of other leaders that wouldn't be acceptable in most circles today. There are kids going to public school in America not knowing that slavery existed. And of course, there are also histories that challenge whether this country is inherently good and righteous, and if we're even on the path of progress. There are histories that highlight how many of our greatest shames were patterns more than one-off moments, and their echoes perpetuate and exacerbate many of our societal issues today. Many of the differences across histories stem from what we believe the purpose of history is. Is it to instill patriotism and encourage civic engagement? Are we meant to learn about the past to not repeat the same mistakes? Are we meant to uphold and or challenge current conventions, and if so, which ones? Even if we're trying to fall back to a neutral stance to just educate and inform, we still have to figure out what parts of history to educate and inform about. Figure out our metrics and measurements to base our choices on. As we've covered in other topics, there's not necessarily a right or wrong answer here. It's about being honest, transparent, and deliberate on what our purpose is, what our intent is, and to hold onto the humility that there is no one true singular history. There's some good news. We are already historians. We already do it. We tell the newer employees what our department, our organization has been and what it's meant to be. We describe past events of our communities. We discuss the nature of our professions. There's a historical component to all of this. We can take the step to also be historiographers. We can also be critical to how we, as well as others, are characterizing our local histories. The city of Boulder is well known for being progressive in many ways. Did you know they made an effort as a city to dig deeper using archives and local historians? They were able to find some stains on their history, such as being a staging ground for the Sand Creek Massacre and for having KKK activity in the past. It helped shift what could have been considered national, state, or even regional issues and turn them into local ones. Helped open eyes and show that since Boulder's history isn't spotless, therefore a more critical eye is needed to look at the present. We can all take a page from their book and likewise look into our local histories. For the optional exercise, take a look at the history of your profession, whether it's law enforcement, planning, law, public administration, parks, human services, whatever it is. How did it come about? Who are considered the founders? What kind of people were they? Any big shifts over the decades, centuries? What about the past still resonates in our professions today? For going advanced, I want to introduce the issue with post-history. Post-history is the idea that we have reached the pinnacle, the apex of human civilization, at least as far as things like our values, government structure, our understanding of human nature. Future advancement is more in inches, such as cooler technologies, tastier food, new music. For our purposes, post-history assumes we've already reached the finish line. And since there is no extra step to take, all this equity talk must therefore be taking us backwards. Deny this post-history. We can assume that future generations can still improve upon what we have in fundamental ways. Up next, we conclude the current state section with the topic of privilege.